Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Pretti-Frontczak, and I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about your emotional intelligence. Some call it an EI, some call it an EQ, and as I've said before, I tend to call it an EQ so we don't get confused with early intervention. And I was going to dive right into 5 things you can do to raise your EQ, but then my wonderful and amazing and wise friend Laura Fish reminded me this morning that it's really important that we always talk about the why, not just the how. I always talk about the what before the how, but there's also this underlying question about the why. And so I thought I'd better start off with why we're even talking about EQ before I get into the 5 ways you can raise your EQ. I'm also wearing my new Superpowers t-shirt. Not that I don't totally love mine, Littleton Friends and Lisa, but my sister made me a new one so I thought I would kind of wear it and showcase it today as we talk about how do we strengthen our superpowers, but also our emotional intelligence. So quickly about the why, then we'll get into the how. And I've got so many resources to share with you that you'll need to go to my blog and download them all. So let's start there actually. So it's christypf.com/what's your EQ. And the what's is not grammatically correct because there's no apostrophe. So if you haven't gone there already, make sure you go to christypf.com/what's your EQ, and you can download all of today's show notes, all the resources I'm going to mention, all the tips and all the strategies and ideas. But the why behind all of this is that there's so much research that's showing us, and I think that most of us know this intuitively. I always share the story that when we were hiring people at Kent State University, we always said, what were the qualifications that you had to come with? And what we never put on the job description that we posted in the Chronicle was that we wanted you to have good mental health. That's what we called it at that time. But what we were really trying to say is we wanted you to have a high EQ. You could have a really high IQ, but if you didn't get along with us, if you weren't empathetic, if you didn't have good self-regulation, if you didn't do self-reflection, then we weren't so sure we wanted you as a colleague. So it was this reminder to me that it's always been important that we think about our EQ, whether we've talked about it, labeled it, or assessed it or not. Oh, and speaking of assessment, if you haven't already, make sure you go to my blog and download the initial version of our EQ self-assessment. Next week it'll be finalized and we'll have it as an online quiz and you can use it and reuse it. But I took mine last night and I was not very excited about my score. I mean, it was pretty good. I can share that. The total score is a 30 and I got a 22. But I was like thinking, oh, I have to be the queen of having a high EQ. So I'll be curious what your EQ was. But anyway, so it's really important in all facets of our life, no matter what discipline you are, what age you are. But in particular, it's important in our work as early childhood leaders and providers because we're building the brains of young children. And so they learn so much through what they see and hear and experience with us. And so if our EQ is low, guess what in turn is low for children? And so we really want to think about how do we raise our own EQ, not only because children are always, of course, watching and that we need to raise their EQ skills, but it's how we sort of lift up communities. It's how we sort of move through in times of challenges. Several of us have been reading Laura Fish's blog about negativity and how do we kind of overcome that feeling about that we'll never get to a change in practice, that they're all out to get us and that we're more divided than we are the same. And so this EQ stuff, while many might call it a soft skill, is an absolutely necessary skill for communities to thrive and for individual members, and especially our young children, to thrive. So that's a quick why. And now to the quick 5 ways of how. So I have my notes as always because I had so many things I wanted to share with you that I thought I better write them down. So there's 5 constructs. There's lots of different ways that people think about emotional intelligence. There's some common definitions, and I've linked to that in the blog. But Myra Prata and I and others have really been for the last several years, if not longer, been thinking about these 5 constructs. And so they're from self-awareness to situational awareness to self-regulation to social awareness to spirituality. And so I'll touch on each of those and I'll give you some tips on how you can raise your own EQ, because when you do the self-assessment, you might find that you're really strong in one place. Like I felt that I was really strong in situational awareness and social awareness, and not so bad in self-awareness. But I didn't do so good in self-regulation and spirituality. So those are 2 places where I can now, from the self-assessment that's on the blog, which is christypf.com/what's-your-EQ, you can then kind of hone in on where you need to go. And I'm going to give you 5 kind of strategies and tips for each of those constructs. And there's really going to be more than that, but here we go. So the first one, which is self-awareness, it's this idea that you are able to know your own strengths and have confidence in those strengths, hence the superpowers. But it's also, as many of you know, that idea of being aware of your shark music. So we've heard about those 2 things a lot, knowing your superpowers and knowing about your shark music. So I just want you to remember that when, things get challenging, the sharks sometimes sneak up on us and we think we're aware of them. We think we've done the exercises to know what our shark music is, but then we find ourselves reacting instead of responding. So if we find that we are thinking back, I wish I would have reacted, oh no, I wish I would have responded differently, then we know that we're not doing the very best we can with our self-awareness. So in the blog, and I'll just mention quickly, we have some mindful inquiry cards that'll help you kind of engage in that self-reflection so that you kind of flex that muscle, if you will, and get it so that you are able to respond versus react. In particular, when things are crazy or you're pushed against a wall or your shark music is really loud. There's also the Whoop app, and so I thought I would share my latest one. Whoop is WOOP for those of you who haven't seen it before, and it's a free downloadable app, lots of research behind it, and it stands for Wish, Obstacle, Outcome, Plan. I think I got it that time. And so sometimes, we get these weird ideas and we get this negative chatter in our minds, and so my latest Whoop one was that the work that I'm doing, maybe it doesn't matter, right? So we can all have this negative chatter in our head. And so I said, okay, the outcome that I wish for, that I'm desiring, is that the work that I engage in, the way I live my life with purpose and passion actually matters, right? So I get feeling sorry for myself. Nobody opened my email or nobody read my blog other than my mom, right? And so I think, well, does it really matter? Am I making a difference? And all of us have that question from time to time, whether it's our children that we're raising, whether it's our dogs that we're caring for, or the children and families that we serve. We wonder, am I making a difference? So if that's my outcome, and the obstacle is that I'm not feeling valued, right? I'm feeling that sort of like sorry for myself. And so in order to raise my EQ, I can do this Whoop activity where I go through this process pretty quickly on the app, and it comes up with a plan. And so the plan for me that it produced was that when I have this feeling that what I have to offer isn't of value, then I will remind and tell myself I am enough. So that was just a quick little example of how you can engage in self-reflection using our mindful inquiries cards. There's some free ones on the blog, as well as the Whoop app. If you haven't lately, you might want to do it one more time if there's something that's an obstacle in the way of your hopes and dreams, especially as we approach the new year. Okay, so that's your tip number 1, is to know your strengths and know your shark music and aim to respond versus react. Tip number 2, this one is about self-regulation. I had to really look at my notes on that one because that one's not my strength. And so my friend Shauna Tomini talks about stop, think, act. And I got tons of ideas of how to help children learn self-regulation, but that was one of my lower constructs on the EQ self-assessment. So why am I having trouble stopping, thinking, and acting? And I thought more about it, and I realized that oftentimes I feel like it's sort of like I'm not really in control, that things are happening to me, that my schedule is not my own to be made. I have to go here, or this is what time I have to get up, or I have to talk to somebody, or I have to meet this deadline. And when I get feeling like that, that's where I don't stop, think, and act. And my self-regulation portion of my EQ is sort of hindered. So in this example, and my dear friends Lisa and Becky Sue, who have joined me today, know this one. This comes from our great friend Crystal, who reminds us that we can have this little phrase that says, up until now. So I can say, up until now, I have felt like I'm not in control of my schedule. Up until now, I have felt like I have to do what everybody else wants and expects of me. And that allows me to remind myself that I'm not the victim, that I am in control, that I can set limits, that I can say no, that I can set policies that will allow me to have some sense of clarity and be able to stop, think, and act. Okay, number 3, because I'm going on too long for each of these, that's situational awareness. So that's the third construct of 5 in our EQ kind of conglomerate. And the situational awareness is, why are things happening? What might happen next? It's this ability to kind of understand what's going around us and then be able to predict what's going to be the next move. It's a little bit like playing chess, that we can kind of see the whole board. We know what the other people are doing on the board. We know what our next move is to get us towards the goal that we want, which is for all children and families to thrive. And so in that example, in the situational awareness, if you find that that construct is a little bit low in terms of your EQ, you might want to just engage in a little bit more reflection and thinking about, why do you have this, why do you feel disconnected? Why don't you have a sense of what's going on in the board? And so I didn't think I was going to like it, but I do. So I'm reading Brene Brown's latest book, and I know you're like, why didn't you think you'd like it? I don't know. I just thought maybe I wouldn't. But, she got me at the first paragraph. So I'm suggesting this if it's not on your list of things to read, because she talks about belonging. And I think that a lot of us, when we get low on our situational awareness, it's that we've lost our way in terms of who is in our group and who do we need to bring into our group, and maybe who do we need to let out of our group for right now. So I really appreciate how she's talking about how many of the things that are happening in our world is because we are not thinking of each other as humans, and that we need to have this true sense of belonging with each other. So if you're feeling like your situational awareness could use a little boost, you might want to check out Brene Brown's book. I put a link to it in the show notes. You might also want to think about an eco-mapping activity. My Colorado friends that are in this year's professional learning community on social emotional learning, that's a mouthful, we did this activity a couple of months ago, where we did an eco map like we do in early intervention, but we did it as a team. And so I put a link to the directions in the blog if you want to do that with your staff or your colleagues, or even for yourself. It lets you look at who's in your map, in your network, and then you can have this greater situational awareness about what's happening, what might happen next, and how to predict that. Okay, number 4, situational awareness. This one is fabulous. If you have ever thought about joining my mastermind, this is where I can help you with this particular part of your EQ. So this idea of social awareness, it's like that kid who is kind of socially awkward, and you're like, oh, if you would just kind of like do it a little bit like this, kids won't reject you, right? And you know that even if you have a spouse that might be a little socially awkward, or a friend, or a parent, or a child of your own kid, right? And it's a little painful to watch. So social awareness is this ability to really do deep listening, and that deep listening gives you really great insight. You can become a great read of people. You understand the issue behind the issue. You don't get caught up in their shark music because you really understand where they're coming from. And so it doesn't trigger your shark music when their sharks are swimming around. And so that really leads to having empathy. And so, again, my friend Myra will remind us that as we want to move up that progression of inclusion and move towards compassion and advocacy and love, really we start off with this idea of having empathy. It's hard to take action in terms of compassion if we don't first have empathy. And so the way that we really learn some deep listening skills, and I'm so glad that my dear friend Kristen has joined us because she can attest to this, is that a mastermind is an opportunity and a strategy that I've really crafted to allow us to learn how to do deep listening, how to truly hold space for one another, and how not to let their shark music trigger our shark music and try to solve something, but to be really socially aware. And so if you find on the EQ self-assessment that your social awareness is a little bit low, you might really think about joining me this spring for a mastermind. Okay, number 5, spirituality. And also a good thing you joined us, Kristen, because this was high for you. So maybe you have some tips as well. This one was low for me. So this idea of spirituality, it's a word that's a little bit hard for me. I do have a blog on spirituality without getting all spiritual. I also have another book that I'll recommend to y'all. This is Contemplative Practices in Higher Education. You're like, what? Yeah. So this is like the subtitles, Powerful Methods to Transform Teaching and Learning. I also put this on the show notes link, so don't forget to write all this down. And of course, Parker Palmer wrote the foreword, so of course it's fabulous, but it's all about how to do contemplative practices in a non-spiritual way that really promotes adult learners learning in higher education. So most of you are in service, not pre-service, but it's still a context for showing how we can help adults gain these skills through contemplative practices. So spirituality, the tip there's a tree of contemplative practices, again, linked to in today's show notes, which are christypf.com/what's-your-EQ. And you can look at the tree of contemplative practices, but it's not just yoga and meditation and all of that, so for some of us maybe woo-woo-y stuff. It's even about volunteering. It's even about sitting in silence for a minute. And so there's these different ways that we can really think about being contemplative, and that we can really think about it's more than just journaling. So for those of you who find it to be a struggle to make time, if you look at the EQ self-assessment, you'll see that there's other facets to being spiritual, and it doesn't always have to be something that is kind of spiritual, if you will. I need my green tea, as y'all know me. Okay, so what spirituality in terms of EQ is really about is connecting with the self, connecting with others, connecting with the content, connecting with the context. So we really want to think about connections. So if you value connections, that's a theme under spirituality. So if you find that you're struggling with that construct of your EQ, maybe change out the word to connecting. Am I connecting with myself? Am I connecting with others? Am I connecting with my staff? Am I connecting with my children? Am I connecting with my administrator? Am I connecting with the K-12 world, right? So all those times where we feel a disconnect, that's really our EQ under this construct of spirituality. And so there's the contemplative practices tree that's in the show notes that you can look at. There's also the link to the workbook of human superpowers, because whenever we use our superpowers, that helps us feel more grounded. And when we feel more grounded, we can then extend an opportunity to feel more connected. All right. So those are the 5 tips. If you just joined us, fabulous. If you got to jump off, no worries. At the show notes, all of these are listed, and I'll put the recording up there as well. But what I want you to think about is how can you use this EQ self-assessment going forward? So we know that the first thing we can do is use it for self-reflection, and that's what Kristen and I and others did last night. We took the self-assessment, we reflected on it, we started thinking, okay, where do I have some strengths? Where do I have some room for growth? Just that process of reflecting enhanced our self-awareness portion of our EQ, which is one of the 5. So then, if I were to journal about why is my spirituality lower? Now I've engaged in a contemplative practice. Now I've raised that part of my EQ. So they're all interwoven. So don't feel like you have to have a big to-do list and all day, every day, you have to be, in the meditative state in order to raise your EQ. It's little things from responding, not reacting, saying things like up until now, being clear about the obstacles, setting limits with people. All of those things raise our EQ. And then we're able to model EQ, we're able to teach EQ, we're able to raise the collective EQ. So the first way we use the self-assessment is self-reflection. The second way is to get to a change in practice. The last Facebook Live I did, and there's another blog that's christypf.com/complex-change, I think, complex change, that I talk about that we can't get to change if we don't pay attention to our staff and our colleague and any adult learner's EQ. And so any of you who are doing pre-service or in-service, I want you to take some time and really think about, am I spending enough time addressing the EQ, or is it an afterthought? So it can be through formal or informal ways, but really think about, are you getting to a change in practice by raising purposefully, intentionally, the EQ of those around you? It can also be for those of you who are coaches, those of you who are consultants, those of you who are in some way interfacing with another adult and need to have these difficult conversations, or sometimes we call them courageous conversations. So by talking to someone about their shark music, talking to somebody about their strengths, talking to somebody about where they feel connected and where they don't feel connected, having those types of conversations as a coach or a consultant triggers that positive emotional attractor, and it also helps increase their self-awareness, which of course is a facet or component of their EQ. So if we're really struggling with a colleague or a staff member who's kind of stuck in their ways, having them have a conversation with us about these attributes really allows us to raise their EQ just by having the conversation. And then the last way, so self-reflection. Second way is to get to a change in practice by really thinking about the EQ of adult learners. Third way is to really hone in on those courageous conversations that you might have to have with a challenging student, for those of you who are pre-service, for those of you who are supervisors or coaches, for a colleague, or maybe even a family member that you have to have a difficult conversation. And then the last one is that no matter where you are, pre-service or in-service, are you delivering professional development that addresses the whole adult learner, their heart, their mind, and their body? And every time you do a course lecture, every time you're doing your syllabus, which many of you are going to be doing in a couple of weeks, anytime you make your PowerPoint, anytime those of you in a couple weeks who have to bring everybody back in the new year, what are you going to do to intentionally address the heart, the mind, and the body of those bodies in front of you? And so those are 4 ways that you can use the EQ self-assessment to not only raise your own EQ, of course, but those around you. So I hope this was helpful. I really appreciate so many of my dear friends from across the country for joining me today. I'll put this Facebook broadcast on the show notes, which again are at christypf.com/what's-your-EQ. Big shout out to my sister for my fabulous Superpowers t-shirt. And, oh, I almost forgot. We have some freebies to give away. So, I put the freebies on the show notes, but I also see all of you who have joined me today, and I think I have every one of your emails. If I don't, shoot me an email to make sure I have your email, and I have freebies. So Myra and Crystal and I don't know, they were up early this morning. I was up early this morning, and they said, you've got to give away our emotional intelligence book for free. So totally go to our show notes, and you can download Crystal and Myra's books. I know you all are a big fan of theirs. They have a book on emotional intelligence. You can buy it, but you can also download a PDF of it. And then the last one that Myra is also giving you for free is called My True Feelings. It's this fabulous, beautiful book. If you have not read it, you totally want to go download it. Just to give you a little teaser of the back, it says, to be a wise human, one who sees with the heart, you have to pay attention. That is where you start. So this is called My True Feelings. It's by our fabulous friend, Myra Parata. You can download it for free in the show notes. You can also buy it and support her work. But those are our 2 big freebies today from our dear friends Crystal and Myra. So a big shout out to them for being up early this morning and getting me the PDF so that I could put them in the show notes. But I will make sure you all get them in an email too. But again, go to christypf.com what's hyphen your hyphen EQ. And you're very, very welcome. And thank you all for joining me, and have a fabulous weekend. And I hope you all can stay warm because it's really cold out there. All right. Thanks, everybody.